As a young man, Harold Stine never traveled far from his home in Charleston, West Virginia, a place of forested mountains, deep valleys, and muddy, lethargic rivers. Friends and family, church and school were secure webbed that encased his life. And yet he left his life to fly in France as a reconnaissance pilot in the Great War. His 2 years in France were the singular sojourn of his life, catapulting him from comfort into chaos. To better understand his father's odyssey, based on pilot log, diary, and a box of some 300 photographs and postcards, William Stine and his wife Sharon retraced his journey in France. They found Harold's flying fields, located towns where he was stationed, matched his photographs and postcards with scenes that unfolded before them, and used his photographs to engage local people. The name of the book is France on Fragile Wings, A Liberty Man's Adventure, 1917-1919, in the 168th Aero Squadron AEF. The authors William and Sharon Stine are both faculty emeriti from Cal Poly University, she with a PhD in human development and he a PhD in engineering. William graduate of West Virginia University, was an early member of Croissant Cockade in Southern California, where he worked for North American Aviation on the B-70 program before entering university teaching, where he attained the status of Fellow of the American Society of Mechanical Engineers. Both are authors of major textbooks in their fields and have written multiple papers dealing with their common interest of sustainable design. Additional material can be found at www.franceonfragilewings.com. I welcome both Bill and Sharon, please. Thank you.
Thank you. That was a lovely introduction.
Thank you, Carl.
We didn't know if we were going to make it because we travel in this country by train, not by airplane. And but our train got us here in time, so that's great, all the way from New Mexico. Shall I start?
So yeah, let's push. Double click. Just double click it. Left hand or right? I'm a Mac person now.
Oh,
I spent most of my life with PCs.
At the left button it'd be here.
That's what I was trying.
I promise you, Carl, I did not change the mouse orientation.
Yeah,
There you go.
Page 2.
On this war, men will think and write for 1,000 years, and things that will concern and interest and fill thoughts will not be the great battles, nor the tactics and the strategy of generals and mighty armies, but human feelings and actions. This is a 1918 quote from Lieutenant General Robert Lee Bullard, commander of the U.S. 1st Infantry Division in the Great War.
What follows includes entries from Harold's journal and his flight log, plus photographs and stories from a time when flying was a new experience and airplanes were made of sticks held together by canvas, glue, and wires. It also is an account of my search for the story of my father's life in France, in a time that he usually avoided discussing with his family.
World War I was the last war fought without modern methods of bearing witness. There are virtually no film reels, few battle photographs, only a smattering of reliable frontline news reports, and much of what exists was either produced under suffocating censorship or made as propaganda. This is written in 2008 in the Newsweek magazine.
The cardboard box was orange.
Yeah.
Okay. The cardboard box was orange and tied with a thin yellow ribbon. On the end were the words, "We put the world to sleep, universal pajamas." Before I started school, I learned to read pajamas because of that box. My mother stored it under my father's World War I leather uniform boots, shoved back into the right-hand corner of the top shelf of the living room closet. That mysterious orange box was my favorite childhood treasure because it held strange stories in hundreds of photographs and postcards, a rolled-up aerial map, and a pilot's log and journals. Filled with questions and fascinated that my father, whom I called Pop, went all the way to France to fly those old rickety airplanes, I'd sneak into the closet with a flashlight when my mother was busy preparing dinner and no one was in the living room. Balanced on the cane-bottomed chair that I was never supposed to stand on, I'd reach for the top shelf and carefully pull out the pajama box. Successfully secreted in the closet floor, sheltered by swinging winter coats, my flashlight beam illuminated the extraordinary images like a projector in a darkened theater. Stories reeled through my head, mimicking my favorite comic strip, The Adventures of Smilin' Jack. Only instead of Jack, the dashing pilot, was my Pop. By the time of our last visit, Pop was in his early 80s. His memories were mixed up and his thoughts were simplified. It was now up to me to relate his story. So Sharon and I decided to use the contents of the Universal Pajama Box to search for clues that might shed light on Harold's untold story. The photographs and journals became our roadmap as we set out to retrace Pop's journeys in France and to write his story of World War I. The result follows.
And just an aside, Harold wrote on the back of many photographs, but he couldn't spell, which is certainly understandable, French words or names of cities. So it became quite a search for some of the places, given his spelling and handwriting. When Harold was ordered to Camp Dick near Dallas, the facilities were still under construction. Many enlisted men were housed in hog and sheep pens left over from the fairgrounds. They slept on metal beds in animal sheds with open wooden slatted walls and cement floors. And Harold, who's in the center here in the white t-shirt, and his hair, you can tell in the pictures, always bumps up. They were set to work also digging trenches. This isn't why he enlisted. He wanted to fly.
But this was the beginning of flight training.
Then he did, finally, after the training there for a number of months, end up landing in France after detours through England. This is a quote by a French author. "A ray of sunlight shone through. The American soldiers arrived, landed in Le Havre. Children discovered blackjack chewing gum, and villagers were impressed by gold-plated teeth and clean-shaven faces." October 6, 1918, this is Harold's journal, Saint-Maximin-l'École, France. Checked in and was assigned to quarters in the old monastery. This is his picture of the train station where he arrived in Saint-Maximin. This is our picture, And throughout the book, we've tried to do then and now pictures, which is 100 years between almost, of the same train station. In the distance, you can see the church where he had his quarters, and the monastery was there. Every morning, church bells awoke Bill and I at 7 and continued to ring every 15 minutes until 10 in the evening. Harold slept through the clatter, we assume, or tried to, in the barracks below that church belfry. The old monastery, now known as Canclo Barracks, still provides rooms for non-commissioned officers in the French army. 17th century wooden gates set into massive stone wall barred our entrance into the courtyard. And we rang the bell, and I talked to the officer there, but unless we had special permission from all of his supervisors, we could not go in, which was understandable. October 8th, 1918, San Maxion. Harold writes, took a stroll in the afternoon and met a French woman who gave me my first conversational French lesson. This comes from J.B. Jackson's book, A Sense of Time, A Sense of Place. They were the first generation to become accustomed to seeing the earth from the air, the first to experience the wonders and terrors of the ocean sky, and were not deterred. Heading east from San Maxion-l'École, we drove through rolling green countryside, ignored by tourists. Surrounded by blooming rapeseed, we tried to imagine a pilot's view of this brilliant yellow blanket from a low-flying World War I airplane.
Issoudun, October 9th. Arrived, Issoudun. Issoudun is a small town, few cafes. Met Jimmy Kincaid, Johnny Walker, Irwin Taper Hager from Parkersburg, West Virginia, and Joe Savage. Also several French girls, Jean, Marguerite, Simone. Harold was interested not only in the friendships of other pilots and observers, but also of the French women, because they're mentioned quite a bit in his diary. In the summer of 1917, the Issoudun Journal reported the coming of the base. It will be the center of exceptional activities that will greatly benefit our surrounding populations. Soon we will have here an army of 4,000 to 5,000 American pilots with its services and its installations. The location could not have been better chosen for an immense, tranquil camp, far from factories and other buildings that could negatively affect the pilot's training. This is a picture of one of the 12 Issoudun airfields today. We found where a number of them were from local pilots, and not World War I pilots, but people who knew the story of World War I aviation in that area. The Americans actually built, as you know, 12 bases there to train American soldiers on the types of aircraft that they'd be flying in combat, and also the techniques that they'd have to use there. Accidents happen often, and as new American pilots who had flown only Jennies and Standards in the States tried the modern and fast war machines of the time, between 1917 and 1919, 1 out of every 10 Americans lost his life in a crash during training at Issoudun. Nestled in a grove of spindly trees, we found it, a moss-encrusted cement obelisk, embedded with bronze tablets. Engraved on the tablets were the names of 171 American pilots killed during training at the Sojourn AIC. Nothing of the facility remains. Just as a note of recent history, this obelisk has been completely refurbished by the Americans, and it now is bright white, and the bronze tablets are a lot more readable.
Kind of ironic that of the 12 airfields that we established at Issoudun, the only one left with a marker is Field 13.
That is.
The cemetery?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I guess.
You're next.
November 4th, 1918, Romorantin. Expected to fly to Orly, but at the last moment was ordered to Colombey-les-Belles. Harold was finally ordered to fly his DH-4 Liberty to the front at an American base at Colombey-les-Belles, only 30 kilometers from the German territory. A 10-minute miscalculation here could put him over enemy territory, and he knew that this was no longer training. 5 of us took off together at 1:15, but went up about 1,000 feet, ran into heavy fog and clouds. I lost my landmarks and the others, but flew by a compass and kept on going.
This is a copy of the original chart that he left, and it sort of gives you an idea of the type of material that the Americans were able to use to fly. We'll tell you a little later about a meeting that we had with an aero club at Châtillon-sur-Seine, and they gave me as a present a current aviation chart for this same area and said, you better give this to your dad if you can.
Knowing he was not alive, but still.
When Harold left Romorantin to fly to the front, he carried a blueprint flight chart measuring 1 foot by 5 feet, tightly rolled so that he could place it on his thigh, unrolling it as he flew along. We used this flight chart to retrace Harold's route on the ground. From here, Azers-sur-Yon, this is Harold's journal again, a strong southwestern wind carried me further north than I had figured. Flew for some time, but could not locate myself. So I landed in a nice field. Found out that I was at Bar-sur-Seine. Harold could not speak French, of course, like most Americans at the time, and he's landed in a farmer's field, and so he was sign languaging with that blueprint chart with the farmer, trying to figure out where he was. Had been running for over an hour, so I headed south and followed the Seine River to Châtillon-sur-Seine, where there is an American flying field where I could get gas. After ship was gassed and oiled, it was nearly 4 o'clock, and as it gets dark around 4:45, I thought it best to stay over until the next day and go when there is plenty of light, for I don't care to overshoot my mark and land in German territory. Total time for the flight, 2 hours and 55 minutes, maximum altitude 2,500 feet. November 5th, 1918, Colombey-les-Belles. Landed okay, immediately received orders to take a plane back to Paris in the morning. Was also assigned to duty with the 4th Corps observation. Returned to Colombia, returned to Colombia and found that our orders to Paris had been canceled. So we took a motor truck to Toul that night, fell in a ditch, and was covered with mud from head to feet. Had a good night's sleep in Toul in one of those French beds. This is actually the second or third time that he's mentioned the French beds. He loved them.
And he took pictures of 2 of them.
Yes. November 10th, 1918, Manonville. Reported to the 4th Corps Observation Group Headquarters and was assigned to the 168th Squadron. The 168th Squadron had been in existence for about 2 months before that, and they had selected, whoops, maybe we can go backwards.
Oh, that's okay.
Previous.
Anyway, they had selected the Flying Death as their squadron insignia.
This is the field where he was in Manonville. The official history of the 168th Aero Squadron, Lieutenant Starbuck reflects on the conditions of the Manonville aerodrome at the time Harold arrived. The mud was so deep on the aerodrome that it made landing very dangerous for heavy machines, and bad weather made flying nearly impossible. The signing of the armistice found the squadron, the 168th, still at Manonville Aerodrome and very thankful the fighting had ceased, for more than one reason. This is the field today. We were able to find the exact location because, although we're not showing it here, there was a picture of an old building Harold called a chateau that he had taken, and that same building is still there, just to the left of the center of the slide, but that's in the book, we didn't bring it. And so we were really thrilled that we knew exactly where he was, and when he talked about, in his journal, the German artillery, we also, in talking to people and in the town, learned that where you see, that's where the Germans were, and we're lobbing over to the field in Manonville.
November 10th, 1918, Manonville. Witnessed an Archie battery, anti-aircraft guns on the ground, work on a Hun plane. After firing about 15 shots, the plane fell into a spin at about 5,000 feet and spun for about 2,000 feet. It leveled out for an instant and out shot a parachute. The plane then took a straight dive for the earth with the pilot in it. Observer landed safely in a parachute, but the pilot was killed. November 11th, 1918. On the morning of November 11th, after it had been announced that hostilities would cease at 11 o'clock, several of us wanted to witness the finish, so we borrowed ships from the 85th Squadron and went up. Saw very intense artillery fire, but that was about all. The weather was very bad for flying. 1 hour, 5 minutes, 6,000 feet maximum altitude. November 12th, Johnny Walker of Sutton, West Virginia, and I reported for duty. Most of the pilots and observers got in a truck early on the 12th, and we took a sightseeing trip and souvenir hunt along the foremost line northeast of Genlis, between Rambouillet and Thiaucourt. Saw lots of dead Huns and Americans as well, as stray hands, legs, and so forth. Saw enough war to do me for the rest of my days. Lots of helmets, guns, and so forth lying around, but were too cumbersome to fool with. This is a picture Harold kept of starting DH-4 in the snow. Normally, I understand it only took 2 men to pull it through, but in the snow, they wanted to make sure that the guy with his hand on the prop got out of the way. November 20th, 1918, Metz. Took McCarran to Metz Aerodrome, where we landed on the aerodrome. 45 minutes, flight, 4,500 feet maximum altitude. Ray broke a prop while taxiing and had to stay several days. Rockwell and Giles had engine trouble and did not get started the following day. And then it began raining, so they stayed a week.
December 20th, 1918, Toul. Moved from Manonville to Toul, 15 minutes, 1,000 feet maximum altitude. Was glad to make the change. Had pretty good barracks and enjoyed dances every week at the base hospital number 51. We found one of those base hospitals where the dances were at another base, and it's not being used as a hospital now. They built a new one, but the people in town remembered from histories coming down, because the French people, our experience was they don't forget the Great War. The stories keep coming down. And so it was fun for us to locate that, where he went to dances.
Do you want to comment on these pictures?
Oh, yeah, these are the pictures that this is Harold's postcard of Toul. And many times when we go into a French town, we'd go to the Mairie and we'd ask to speak to the historian. And that was very, very helpful, many times. And then we'd also go to the Tourist Information Center, where they usually had very attractive young French women working who were amazed at the copies of photographs we took and knew where some of the places were, but then would question us about what we were doing and why we were doing it and why we wanted to see this. So we showed this one young woman in Toul Harold's postcard that he purchased, because he purchased tons of postcards. And she knew right where it was. Notice the bulletin board on the left and the shutter, and then our picture, there's still a bulletin board, and the same shutter was open, which was really kind of weird. I mean, we couldn't quite believe it.
This is Harold's best friend, the pilot, standing on the wing, Johnny Walker, who was also from West Virginia, right up the river from where Harold was born and raised.
There you see the logo, too, for the squadron.
This is a poem from the 168th Aero Squadron. The author is unknown, but the poems are on file at the Air Force History Museum. And I tell you, it's no cinch, bud, to push these planes around, for often we find the muds 6 inches deep on the ground. But we all push with a will then. There is joy in every groan, for every foot means a step, boys, that's much nearer home.
February 28th, 1919, Dijon. Left for Nice, and leave for Nice came through. So Johnny and I rode to Dijon and started out. The American Expeditionary Forces often had leave to go down to the Mediterranean, and you'll see that there were excursions arranged for them, and so Harold was very pleased about this. The American AEF were as much tourists as they were soldiers. They came to love the French food, the red wine, the souvenirs, and the sightseeing. This is from an unpublished report of the YMCA. This is a YMCA excursion brochure that Harold saved, thank heavens. And it shows kind of car they went in, which will show you a picture of his car. And where they went, Menton, Monaco, Monte Carlo. And this is how they traveled. There's another picture later on that's in the book when they had a flat tire and the villagers gathered around. But I love that. Passed through Lyon, Marseille, and Cannes. Arrived March 2nd in Nice. Very impressive city.
The story of Pop's I remember the most was about his experiences early in April 1919. He flew to Paris for a flag presentation exercise. He spent a number of days sightseeing and partying in Paris. When it came time to return to Châtillon-sur-Seine, the ground crew couldn't get his airplane started. For some unknown reason, a Buddy's DH-4 Liberty was available, so he flew that one back to Châtillon. He had two people in the rear cockpit, Ben Coyle and Herb Kohler. April 14th, 1919, Châtillon-sur-Seine. Flew back with Coyle and Kohler in the rear cockpit, 1 hour, 30 minutes, 2,000 feet altitude. Throttle would not coupe and overshot the field on landing. Busted 4 wings, no one hurt. The trip was a grand success. He wore dentures for the rest of his life. This was luckily Harold's only accident in France, but he did break his front teeth. This is from the U.S. Air Force archives that we found. Harold didn't have a copy of this in his box. Lieutenant Stine showed he should be given the prize for any maneuver since he has his airplane trained to climb telephone poles. Asked Lieutenant Coyle. Perhaps the bright lights and pretty faces of Paris dimmed his eyesight.
Too much GPA.
This is a picture of the Châtillon-sur-Seine field today. The Châtillon-sur-Seine Air Club, with whom we had met with 2 years ago, had planned a barbecue banquet honoring Harold, complete with newspaper coverage, the mayor, speeches, and great champagne. After lunch, I was told that the club had decided that Philippe would take me up in one of the club airplanes. I was thrilled, and he and I took off from the same grassy runway that my father had used so many years before. We flew over the city of Châtillon and the relatively unchanged view of the farmlands where they still grow grain. After landing back at the Châtillon-sur-Seine aerodrome, I tried to picture how Harold finally stopped his Liberty with no braking system. Although his plane was fitted with a tail skid, the engine was still racing after it touched down. And he drove his airplane between the corner of the hangar and a telephone pole. This is not the hangar that that was there in 1919, but it's in the same location. This is what the Aero Club uses today.
Days after Harold was moved to Châtillon-sur-Seine, 3 of his pilot buddies were killed during routine demobilization of flights to bases in western France. Even though they were no longer in danger of enemy fire, pilots continued to lose their lives during the months of demobilization after the armistice. This is a forgotten part of the Great War. This is another poem written by an officer there. They sleep beneath the flag they've stainless kept, enfolded by the land they helped to save. Above the sun shines on a better world, because such men as they so freely gave. The victories won, our task in France are o'er, we'll sail the Atlantic's homeward trail. Perhaps our mental pictures will be dimmed, when time and space or memory drop their veils, but we'll ne'er forget the Seine, the Doubs, that's the other river in Châtillon, that hill and forested bordered plain, or castles and chateaux that nestle in the quaint French town of Châtillon-sur-Seine. Then Harold's journal deals at the very end, of course, of his trip home. Received orders here at Columbia-les-Belles to go to Le Mans at 6 a.m. this morning. We were loaded on a train taking our rations. This journey was started on trains, but he ended up describing walking a great deal, not very happy about that sometimes, and marching a great deal, and sleeping out on the ground, but they were headed towards the Atlantic and a ship eventually to go home. So since he had camera and he still had film, he took pictures. Like this. There are quite a few pictures that Harold brought home of French families, and you can see one of the pilots there on the far left, Harold's buddies, posing with all of the kids in this village. Until finally they reached the, oopsie, oh well, that's all right, the camp in Brest that was used, there it is, that was used for the soldiers. It is an old camp, it goes way back, and was used in World War II too. But when we saw U.S. on this picture, we had no idea where it was, and it was at the memorial, the cemetery in Verdun, where we talked to the gentleman there who was in charge of that, and he knew it right away and told us a lot of history about this camp. When we went this past winter back to France to give the book to all the people that helped us, which was quite a trip, and we went to Verdun. Unfortunately, he was the only one. He had died quite suddenly, and we were not able to give him a copy, but his replacement, and we donated it to their archives and library. My name was posted on the sailing list today for the Leviathan. This is quite a story. This ship was, you probably all know it, but ended up in New York Harbor when the war was declared, and so the American government seized it immediately and changed the name Vaterland to the Leviathan, and it was the largest ship afloat for tourists when it first sailed from Germany. Oh, that one. That's, can you go back there? Yeah. This is the dining room on its maiden voyage when it was the Vaterland. And we thank Frank Brainerd for his huge 3 volumes of history of this ship, which is just fascinating. And then we'll show you the dining room of the Harold's. And again, we saw this picture, we really weren't sure what it was, but then when we were researching the ship, the Leviathan, I came across the previous one of the dining room, and I said, you know, that's the same, exactly the same ceiling, the same arches, the same everything. So this is the mess hall where he ate.
It's a nice table, we have benches.
Yeah, right.
Must have been fun in any kind of seascape too.
Right.
The Great War was not discussed in our family very much. It was as if Pop knew that none of us could begin to understand the pain he felt in the destruction of life and land that he had witnessed, or the joy he had experienced when flying in France. Every year, on November 11th, though it was a holiday, Pop would sit down to breakfast and dressed in his best three-piece suit and a somber silk tie. He'd drive downtown by himself right after he ate. No one ever asked why. Around noon, he'd return with a bright red poppy, paper poppy, in his lapel. A Liberty man's somber recognition of the time and place he would never forget. Thank you. Sharon and I will be signing our book tomorrow at by the bookstore, but we made arrangements with the bookstore to, if anybody wants a copy, or we're going to go up and sign it until 6 o'clock this afternoon. And so we have to leave to get up there. But
I'd like to thank you all. It's really oh, there's the map, yes. Special to present this. It took us 8 years, but they were wonderful years. To people who know something and understand.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.